On today's show, the first round of the 2024 NBA draft is now in the books. The Atlanta Hawks added Zaccharie Risacher to the mix with the number one overall pick. We'll get into all of what transpired there, what to make of that selection, the fallout, Landry Fields comments, and much more. And all of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1750 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here on a Wednesday evening into Thursday post-NBA draft first round. And today's podcast is sponsored by the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I should also encourage you at the top of the podcast, make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe to the show on YouTube, on Apple, on Spotify, on Overcast. Ratings and reviews, all that fun stuff is appreciated, and I definitely appreciate you being here on this episode and for all the episodes moving forward. I'm sure we have some new listeners on this particular evening because the Hawks had the number one overall pick going into Wednesday. There was all kinds of rumblings about trades and trade downs and who they were going to pick and all of that. I did a show yesterday with my kind of final thoughts and some of the latest intel on that. Before that, I had wall-to-wall guests on the podcast, and I appreciate everybody for doing that, coming on the show, give their insight. But it was relatively quiet on the intel front on the day of the draft on this Wednesday. Every single public report that I saw kind of centered to some degree on Zaccharie Risacher as the likely pick of the Hawks, but nothing was definitive at any point in time. Sean Sharania and Adrian Wojnarowski both said in the half hour before the draft actually happened that he was kind of leaning to be the number one overall pick. Then Woj tossed out Reed Sheppard as a player in real consideration late in the game. And I don't know how real that was, to be honest. Taking behind the curtain a little bit here on the podcast, I had someone who knows things, I would say, tell me something on Wednesday morning that Reed Sheppard was kind of in the mix for the Hawks. And honestly, I didn't know what to make of that to the point where it was not reportable by any means for me. But I took note of it at least. I was not, as shocked as everybody else because I had heard that earlier in the day when Woj brought it up. But even when he brought it up, it was very clear that Risacher was kind of in the driver's seat along the way. And when the pick came, the only real drama was where the Hawks were going to take him. It was kind of been reported at that point in time. They drafted him, and then it was like this brief moment, okay, they've picked Risacher. Is there any chance that they're going to trade this pick down? Because I've covered ad nauseum the last few weeks, there is always a chance of like a conditional trade where you move down. None of that happened. The Hawks were celebrating the pick right away in the green room, or however you want to put that, with regard to where they took this pick. They had Zach Walsh, the longtime equipment guy for the team, who's beloved around this parts in Atlanta. He was actually the one that called the pick in. There was no shenanigans, and they were able to pick the guy they wanted in the end. Now, if you listen to the show regularly, and especially yesterday, I gave a little bit more of my kind of final thoughts. I would not have picked Zaccharie Risacher number one overall. At the same time, I don't think this is some crazy thought. I saw lots of, as it is wants to happen, I saw a lot of strong reactions on all sides, and I get it. Everybody has their favorite players or their least favorite players, and I totally understand. But something I've been saying for quite some time, really the entire draft cycle, plus especially after the Hawks won the lottery, it was never as clear as people thought it was back in the day when they were kind of focusing on Alex Sarr 6 weeks ago. It was never a situation for me where I was going to have a clear and concise number one overall pick. As I said yesterday, I ended up with Sarr number one on my board. If it was me and I had to make a pick, I would have taken Alex Sarr, but the gap was not particularly big. And there is all kinds of positives and negatives on all of these prospects, and that includes Risacher, that includes Sarr, that includes Donovan Clingan. Pick your prospect. They have weaknesses in this class. So if you were coming on hoping I was going to bury this pick, I'm not going to do that. I will give my opinion, as I always do. I don't hold back. It's just I'll give the nuance. I'll give the entire picture. And, polling people that I trust around the league, there were people that don't love this decision, and I understand that as well. I think it's a relatively high floor decision. It's also not, in my opinion, a huge upside swing. So if you are in more of the median floor kind of evaluation zone, it looks a little bit better. If you were hoping for a superstar upside player, maybe a little bit less of that. But anyway, that's kind of the Cliff's Notes at the top of the podcast. What we're going to do the rest of the episode, I will give my kind of scouting report, what you look at with Zaccharie Risacher and what I've been watching with him for weeks and months now. offense, defense, the whole package. Then later on in the podcast, I'll get into a little bit about what he's going to be making contractually. I will share some quotes, both from Risacher, who spoke to the media, and also Landry Fields with some actual audio from Landry Fields. And then at the end of the podcast, we'll kind of look ahead to day 2 of the draft. And to timestamp things, as I've promised to do that, I'm recording this podcast about 12:30 a.m. on Thursday morning. So if anything changes, you will know when that happened, and I will have a new podcast if there is big news at any point in time. All that said, let's dive in now to what Risacher is, because obviously after all of the intrigue, he is the guy for the Hawks that was drafted at number 1 overall. If you are not familiar, and I know a lot of folks that in my life that are not diehard NBA fans were kind of watching for the first time tonight, kind of like, who is this guy? Asking me questions. I got texts from people that I went to college with, et cetera, that kind of thing. Risacher is a wing, actually born in Spain, but he is French, of course. Just turned 19 in April, very young. Will play most of his rookie season in the NBA at age 19. That's a pretty strong thing. Age is often overstated or understated, but I think that he was a part of a real team in Europe at 18. Not a small factor there. 6'8.5" without shoes, 6'9.5" wingspan, 8'11" standing reach. So really good size, good length. His standing reach is actually higher than a lot of guys who have longer wingspans. So it's not like he has the longest wingspan in the world, but certainly a guy with real small forward size, if nothing else. He played for Borg last season overseas after being in Asvel before that. He didn't play a ton. 23 minutes a game, 11 points, 4 rebounds, 59% true shooting, 22% usage this last season. He was a role player on that team, but again, he was 18 years old. He averaged 17 points a game, per 36 minutes, if you are translating that to like starting level minutes. If you're playing the drinking game that people have told me that they've been playing the last couple of weeks, yes, Risacher is the wing with size who can shoot and defend. One more time, that is the package in a nutshell. He is a big wing with size who can shoot and defend, and every single team in the NBA wants that player. Just ask Mikal Bridges, who just got traded for 5 first-round picks. Obviously, I'm not saying it's Mikal Bridges. That'd be a nice outcome for him, but everybody in the league wants this archetype, and there's a reason why he went number 1 overall. Now, offensively, we'll start there first. That's probably the side of the floor that people kind of care about most, usually with prospects. And the number 1 appeal, as we'll get into and actually hear from Landry Fields later on in this podcast, is his shooting on offense. 39% from 3 this last season on pretty good volume, almost 41% on catch and shoot opportunities. He took a bunch of relocation attempts and shots on the move. He is a good ball mover. What I mean with the ball in his hands and also off the ball. He's a really good cutter. He navigates screens well on offense, etc. He had 2 really hot stretches as a shooter this year, at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, in the middle, kind of a downturn, but the overall package was pretty good. His previous pro seasons were not as good as far as the percentages were concerned. I will say, though, he changed his mechanics before this season. They are much, much cleaner and better now. If you watch tape from him a year and a half ago versus now, it is night and day in a good way for the Hawks. That gives me more confidence that he is actually real in this shooting. But I will say this probably now and again 10 more times. I do think for him to have the outcome that the Hawks are envisioning for him, he's going to need to shoot at a high level. Some guys, it's more of a bonus or whatever. I do think that Zaccharie Risacher is going to have to shoot at a high level for him to be the kind of player the Hawks are hoping that he's going to be. But I think that's probably going to happen, if I had to guess, at this point in time. Especially at this draft slot. And look, you're grading on a curve this year no matter what. People are going to be judging him as the number 1 overall pick. I get that. But I would just kind of not try to forget that, but it's not quite the same as usual. But he's got to make shots, for sure. Now, beyond that, he has good feel for the game. He makes quick decisions. He's not a plotter, which I enjoy. Something that appeals to Quinn Snyder, who likes to make quick decisions. He's not a catch and hold guy the way that some guys are. He's a really good cutter. He knows where to be when he's off the ball, which I like a lot. He is comfortable attacking closeouts on offense, which is something that's going to be huge because in theory, his shooting is his biggest weapon. So when he's proving that, people will kind of fly at him and play off of that a little bit. Being able to take advantage of that by attacking closeouts is very important. He's pretty good in transition, I think. He's not a nuclear athlete, I will say. He's not an explosive, twitchy athlete by NBA standards by any means. I do think that he is fluid. He's a fine athlete, not a great test athlete, like as far as like max vertical, all that stuff. But I think if you watch him play, he moves well. He's kind of slithery, a little bit more fluid than an explosive, but I think it's fine. There are some challenges for him at the rim and beating guys off the dribble. So like what I would say is he's not an on-ball player right now. Doesn't mean he can't ever be one, but he isn't like an above the rim athlete necessarily. He's forced to use his craft a little bit more. He gets bumped off his spot sometimes. He loses balance sometimes. I think that will improve with strength as he gets into an NBA conditioning system. It's a little bit thicker, but I know Synergy had some pretty rough finishing numbers for him in the half court in particular, especially for a guy who's 6'9", 6'10". But I think that he can get a little bit better in the mid-range. But generally speaking, he's an off-ball player for the most part right now who's also kind of rely on that shooting. But the shooting is a very, very important thing. And I know I always say this, but you can't have enough shooting, especially from the wings. But I think that's the biggest thing about Risacher's offense, something Landry Fields said multiple times, as we'll get into later on. The shooting is a huge part of the appeal with Risacher. And look, he's not dynamic and break people down. Like the highlight reel stuff is not going to be known necessarily, but he makes the right play more often than not. He feels the game well, and the shooting and the size and the skill level is all there. So that's the offensive side of the floor. We'll get into the defense in a second because that's also very important. I know I'm a sucker for defense, but it's also a big part of the package with Risacher. But before we get into all that, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast and the folks from Gametime. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, and that makes getting tickets to basketball games, baseball games, etc. faster and easier. When you look at the Gametime app, they have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest possible price guarantee. And they are a fantastic option in Gametime for making things easy for you across the board. I've been a regular user of the Gametime app for quite some time now. It's come in handy for me a number of different times when it comes to Falcons games or Braves games, United games, as well as other shows and concerts across the city of Atlanta. And you can save up to 60% off when buying last-minute tickets, and that includes sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have flash deals to save a bunch of money, and also choosing a section and letting Gametime choose the seats for you in that section saves even more. They also have an awesome feature that I really enjoy when you can actually toggle to see the final price with no surprise fees. You get the checkout screen, and importantly, get a panoramic view of your seats and kind of where you'll be sitting in that venue that you're looking for before you buy the tickets. So there's never a surprise. You're getting the lowest possible price guarantee as well with the folks with the Gametime app. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime right now. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. One more time, that is creating an account at Gametime app, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, and to the defense for Zaccharie Risacher, a very, very good team defender already, which I think is really appealing. Not going to necessarily be your shutdown corner type where you're playing one-on-one defense on the perimeter, all that stuff. There's value in that too. But I think if you are a appreciator of defense like I am, he does a lot of things well already for a guy who's been playing professionally a while, but was playing in a real league at 18 years old and executing at a high level. He knows where to be. As a help side guy, he makes the right rotations most of the time. He generally uses his length pretty well. The wingspan is not like massive, but standing reach is pretty good. And 6'10" wingspan is still totally fine for a wing in the NBA. I think there's some chatter in some circles about him playing the 4, but I think he's mostly going to be a wing. Probably going to be a primary 3, I have to say, at this point in time. About 1.3 steals per 36 minutes, which is totally fine. Nothing great, but he's got some pretty active and good hands. I like what I saw from him defending guards and getting around screens and using his length. Again, not a super duper athlete, and I think some guards would maybe be a little bit too quick for him, but he can kind of negate that quickness disadvantage with size and fluidity. I think he can defend basically 1 through 4. Would be the idea around Risacher. We'll see how good he is at that, but that is the theory around him. Not going to be able to guard centers, I don't think, but certainly a multi-position, versatile defender, which is very valuable in this league. Not as good, again, as I mentioned a second ago, one-on-one against those big physical wings, but he has to get stronger. That's the case for most prospects, and that includes him for sure. He's definitely very wiry right now, thin, lanky, however you want to say that. Not the biggest guy. He's got to put some weight on for sure, as a lot of prospects do need to. And in general, I would say he's just not profiled as a stopper defensively. I think he's going to be a good defender, which does matter, but I don't think he's going to be like an all-defense, ridiculous Kawhi Leonard defender. Like, I don't see that. I do see him being a guy that you don't have to worry about at all, at the very least, which is a good thing to have at the forward spot. Solid across the board. Again, knows where to be, rotations. He's ahead of his youth, I would say. He's much more advanced than a typical 18-year-old at playing off-ball defense, and that does matter quite a bit. And then rebounding, not great, but okay for a small forward. Something to note there with the rest of the roster, but plenty of size. Look, I'll just say this right now. When you draft Risacher at number 1 overall, long term, the Hawks just announced to the world that their plan right now, as of June 27th, 2024, is to have a forward duo of Risacher and Jalen Johnson. That is their plan. It's very obvious. Jalen's probably the most untouchable player on their roster coming in. They spent the number 1 overall pick on Risacher. That is the projected duo moving forward. Obviously, you have to have more than 2 forwards, but those are the projected starting forwards. I don't know if he's going to start opening night. I don't really care about that right now. It's much more of a long-term pick, but those are the 2 guys at the forward spots for Atlanta long-term as of this moment. Okay, we'll come back to his overall projection later on. We'll talk about Landry and what he said. One thing to note here, I will spare you the long luxury tax spiel, but as a reminder, if you missed this, number 1 pick gets paid a decent amount of money at this point in time. It's 4 years and $57 million or so in total salary. The last 2 years are team options, as all rookie contracts are in the NBA, but it would be a shock if he's not on the team or on that contract for 4 years. $12.6 million in year 1, and that is a factor for a team that's got luxury tax concerns, but that's worth noting there. As far as quotes are concerned, I'm going to share some Landry Fields audio for you in a moment. Before we do that, though, Risacher actually spoke to reporters in both Atlanta via Zoom and also people in New York on the ground. There were lots of Atlanta reporters actually at the draft. I know Laura Williams was there, some TV folks, Bailey Burmaster, etc. Reggie Chapman was there, I believe, as well. Anyway, both were short sessions, and Risacher is, of course, from France. English is not his first language. He speaks English, but it's not always like, he's not speaking his first language. Keep that in mind. But he said a few things here to kind of hit on that he's willing to do whatever it takes to be on the floor. That's what you want to hear about a rookie in particular. He views himself as a versatile player who could easily fit in and also is looking forward to finding his role in Atlanta. I like that. He was actually asked about who kind of models this game after, of guys in the league right now, and he actually referenced Klay Thompson, which I tweeted out and people got mad about. I'll say this. Klay Thompson's one of the 5 best shooters of all time. So I'm not projecting Risacher to be Klay Thompson on offense, because that would be a silly thing to project pretty much anyone to be. But they do kind of play similarly on offense in some ways. Not exactly the same, but an off-ball player like Klay was, super duper shooter, all that stuff. Risacher is a little bit more, actually, I would say, on the ball as a passer. Klay was much more of a shoot or don't kind of guy. Defensively, it falls apart because Risacher is a lot different defender than Klay was, but I can see the modeling after Klay with the way he moves off the ball. I will say that. And obviously, if he's even approaching the level of shooter that Klay is, or Klay at least was, or I think probably still is, that would be a huge win for everybody involved. And then also, Risacher talked about doing a lot of different things, defending multiple positions, also shooting. He emphasized that. It's a clear appeal. And as a spoiler alert for what we'll get into in a second, Landry Fields also spoke, let's just say, repeatedly about shooting being part of the equation here. Not a huge surprise. Quinn Snyder, who is not making the pick, he's the head coach, but he's obviously in the mix. Quinn has a well-known affinity for perimeter shooting. Landry understands that. The entire league, I know people sometimes get tired of me talking about three-point shooting during the season, but there's a reason why. It leads to winning. It leads to proper offense. It leads to better, efficient offense. It's not always making shots, but also taking threes. And I think this pick kind of outlines that and the priority placed on shooting that this front office is trying to do. And of course, the number 2 guy in the front office, Kyle Korver, is one of the 10 best shooters of all time, I would say, by the numbers. And I'm not exaggerating. He was that good as a shooter, so he probably knows firsthand as well. All right. We'll have more coming up from Landry in a second when it comes to some audio from him. And then my final thoughts and kind of a look ahead to the rest of the draft on on Thursday. And then what else is happening for the Hawks. But first, a word from our partners on today's podcast. All right, let us dive back in with Landry Fields. And Landry talked to the media quite a bit. I'm going to play a few clips for you and also talk about some stuff that I don't want to play the entire clip for you. It's about a 15-minute press conference or so with Landry. He was a little bit rushed. Obviously, the work is not done. The draft is still happening, all that stuff. So he was not going to sit there forever and talk. But I will leave with this. He was asked about how important defense was in the selection of Risacher, and here's what he had to say about that.
Very important. And it's not just stuff that we see with the potential on the ball. It's the versatility in switching off the ball as well, in the right spots, anticipating well. I think there's other areas that we can continue to develop, and him having the growth mindset that he does and the love for the game is going to make that much easier. So, defense was really a huge part of all this. That's why I say before, just the total package, things that we look at offensively and defensively for a well-rounded player.
So I mentioned before, defense is very important here. It's a two-way bet. Obviously, you could argue, and I probably would, that their number one appeal with Risacher is the shooting, but they do not make this pick without some pretty good confidence in Risacher's defense. I'm pretty sure about that from what I've heard, and that kind of is outlined there by Landry. He said it was close between Risacher and a couple other guys. They considered a lot of different guys. In the end, they chose him, of course. I'm going to quote him now. Having this pick, quote, was not necessarily about having any direction. I think we took this as an opportunity to get who we felt was the best player in the draft, end quote. Obviously, that's going to be the sentiment that's shared for the number one overall pick. But also, he said it, and there you go. Number one pick, number one player on their board, you would presume. He was asked about an area in which Risacher might need to grow his game, as everybody has one. He noted improving his body, getting stronger. Some of that is natural, as he noted, and I would agree, as he ages and gets a little bit kind of that grown man strength kind of thing. But that's going to definitely have to happen. That was kind of the number one thing that he talked about in the improvement section. He also talked about Quinn being a part of the process and that he's thrilled with the pick. He noted that Risacher played later on into the summer than most every prospect in the class. I actually asked about how that might affect his offseason plan about summer league, etc. Got a non-answer there, unsurprisingly, but I figured I would at least ask. There's also a question from Allison Mastrangelo of WSB about the number one pick and expectations that I want to play for you now. So here's what Landry had to say about that.
And when you take a player at number one, there's always the expectation of him being an immediate impact player, face of the franchise. I mean, do you see that in Zaccharie? I mean, he's only 19 years old too. I mean, do you see that potential and maybe being a starter and impact this year?
It's hard to project out in terms of playing minutes and all that stuff, but of course, we want him to be the absolute best player he can be. Now, how we're defining franchise player, I'll leave that to you. But there's nobody that wants to see him succeed more than us, and we're going to absolutely set him up to do that.
Also, Landry was asked kind of about what stood out to the Hawks about Risacher, which is broad on purpose, but I think it was a pretty interesting answer. So here's what he had to say about what stood out about Risacher in this process.
Well, you start just by what you see. 6'10", he's got the ability to play on both sides of the ball, defend, versatile defender, really, really good shooter and a high IQ type of player. The amount of development that he's had up until this point is fantastic, and he's still only 19. He'll be 19 all throughout next year, and I've consistently said the important qualities for us in the past about those types of players and who we want in this building at the end of the day, and he possesses a significant amount of those. So thrilled to have him.
And finally, a question from me. I'll actually include the question here, but I asked about the role Risacher might play on offense and what the Hawks are trying to do, what they kind of envision him doing as far as scheme, role, etc. And then Landry also answered the defensive side. So I asked about the offense, but I actually gave a two-way answer here. So here's what Landry had to say about that.
How do you envision his role offensively and kind of what he can be short-term, long-term on the end of the floor?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be more so a Quinn question, but some of my takeaways, kind of things that I've said, just a role of being able to be a switch defender, the versatility of moving up and guarding bigger guys and even guarding down, the way he's able to move his feet on that side of the ball. And then shooting being at a premium in this league, especially for a guy that is 6'10", like that is really, really helpful. And what I really enjoy too about his game is what he does when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. He doesn't just stand, like he's moving, he's cutting, he's crashing the boards. So just keeping those extra possessions alive, putting us in the best position every game to be successful. You need that out of all those guys. So there's a lot of IQ there that we like, and those are some of the things that I see.
As you hear there, he notes the versatility defensively, the shooting premium, and the off-ball movement. But all stuff that I've mentioned before, but all kind of noteworthy as to what the Hawks are looking for, what they see from him. Not obviously going to give away the store. And Landry is always kind of quick to pivot to Quinn, who's the person implementing everything. But at the same time, like he's the one that's picking the player. So it's all kind of in one box. So there's Landry's thoughts on the pick. There'll be more, by the way. I'm fairly sure if the Hawks follow their usual template, they will be introducing Risacher in a formal press conference later this week, maybe Friday, Saturday, something like that. In that range, they usually do a broadcast on Valley Sports Southeast for the record on those. I'm not sure that's going to happen. They've not announced that yet, but that's probably the plan if I had to guess at this point in time. By the way, the Hawks also released their press release as I'm talking to you now. I'm going to quote Landry from the release as well. Quote, "We are thrilled about taking Zaccharie. He has the ability to play on both sides of the ball. He's a versatile defender, a really good shooter, and a high IQ type player. The amount of development he has had up to this point is fantastic. He's only 19 years old. We couldn't be more excited to welcome him and his family to Atlanta." End quote. So there you go on that. Nothing else to say as far as like news on that front, but that was in the press release tonight, and we'll see when he is actually announced to the local media and fans, all that stuff. Probably Friday, if I had to guess. So what now, basically? I said this before. As you might have heard yesterday, I did not pick Risacher number 1 overall. If I had to pick that, that's fine. I don't hate this at all. I think it's very defensible. I think it's a eye of the beholder draft. And that is hard to parse at number 1 overall. I thought some of the reaction was too negative tonight. It would have been too positive, all that stuff. There's the whole Alex Sarr factor here where like there was questions about that after, to Landry tonight about like, how you handle it. It doesn't really matter now. It's water under the bridge. I'm sure there'll be a summer league matchup that we can get into that stuff again in July. But I will say this. There's no reason to bury this pick if you don't like it. There are plenty of pathways to Risacher being a very good NBA player. I may not see superstar upside as a likely outcome here, but two-way wings are very valuable. The shooting is very valuable. The defense is potentially valuable as well. We'll talk more about that later on. But as for next steps about the roster, it's too early to tell what's going to happen next. I thought the Hawks could have made a trade today. That would have been not surprising at all, but they didn't. It was one pick in the entire day, and there you go. Maybe they might be more eager to move DeAndre Hunter now. I don't know if that's true for sure. I'm just speculating because honestly you can't have too many wings, so you don't suddenly have to trade somebody on your wing room right now because you have Risacher. If they had drafted a center, a la Sarr or Klingon, there would have been a lot more urgency, I think, to trade Capella or Kongwu because you just can't have 3 of those guys. On the wing, that is not a problem at all. And also, as I always say, rookies are usually not the best players. So it's one of those things where he may not be your best small forward on opening night. So we'll see if he starts. It doesn't matter. We'll get into that later on. But wing depth is not a problem, even if they have, quote unquote, too many guys. That's not really possible, I don't think. So of course there are looming luxury tax concerns, which we'll get into at a later date. I'll say that now, but I think broadly speaking, there's a lot to like about Risacher. Yes, it's unfortunate on some level the Hawks won the lottery in a year with no obvious number 1 pick. It is what it is, water under the bridge. But I said this last night, I'll say it again now. The Hawks are supposed to be picking number 10 in this draft. They would not have had any prayer of getting Risacher at number 10 overall, obviously, or Sarr, or Klingon, who didn't fall that far. Like the guys that we kind of argued about for weeks, that was only made possible by the Hawks jumping to 1. So that was a bit of good fortune. And there you go on that. All right. So from here, it's 1 a.m. Thursday morning. Day 2 of the draft begins at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Afternoon restart. Currently, the Hawks do not have a pick in the second round, right? So it's not really worth doing a full-on second round preview. But I will say, as they did last year, the Hawks could get back in the second round fairly easy. They traded for Mo Gay last year. It isn't that hard to find a second round pick. There are guys that I like that are available. I'll just list them now, especially, and this is not a comprehensive list, I'll say. So if they get somebody else, that's totally fine too. But I'm surprised Kyle Filipowski is still available as second round arrives. I had him in the top 17 or 18 for me. I think he fit in Atlanta. I don't know how they would get him, but notable there. Kind of a tweener big, but could pair well with Jalen, could pair well with a Kongwu, etc. Johnny Furphy is available as well. He's probably the second most surprising guy. But a little bit further down, guys that were supposed to be falling this far, but I like Justin Edwards of Kentucky, Harrison Ingram of North Carolina, Oso Ighodaro of Marquette, Trey Alexander of Creighton, and then also Isaiah Crawford of Louisiana Tech, who I'm a big fan of in the second round. So those are some players to keep an eye on. Again, the Hawks might do nothing on Thursday, but obviously we'll be monitoring guys like Capella, guys like Hunter, guys like Murray and Young. AJ Griffin, I think, could be a guy that could get traded, and I wouldn't be terribly shocked, for instance. I'd be pretty surprised if they traded like someone like Kobe or Mogayer. whoever like that. But and Jalen's not going to go anywhere. But we're in this weird situation where Thursday is the second round of the draft. There'll be activity across the league, I would say. This is the first time ever for this 2-day format. And some folks that I have talked to around the league think that it might be kind of a trade-heavy day, both with picks and not picks. But maybe not. We'll see. And then free agency, by the way, as a reminder, opens on Sunday. And the Hawks have decisions to make on Saturday with options. We'll get into that probably tomorrow about Saddiq Bey and V. Krejci and Seth Lundy and Garrison Matthews, Bruno Fernando, etc. So a busy weekend no matter what happens, but the Hawks are still sort of in this position where they made the number one pick today. That's a huge moment. It's the first time the Hawks made the number one pick in decades. So it's a big moment for the franchise, but there is a lot more work to do. We'll see what the Hawks do moving forward, and that's all I have on today's podcast before I fall asleep on the camera. So thank you for listening, everybody. I definitely appreciate it. If you've been following the entire draft cycle, thank you very much. We don't go anywhere. Obviously, this is a regular 5-day-a-week podcast all year long, and we're not slowing down anytime soon. So if you're a new listener, I implore you and thank you already for sticking around long-term. If you're just joining us for the first time today, please join us again. I very much appreciate that. If you're an everyday listener, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please subscribe to the show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. If you're watching on YouTube, please like every episode as well, in addition to subscribing to the podcast, and tell your friends. I'm sure that you have a Hawks fan friend in your life that you might have heard from tonight that's not listening to the show already. Spread the word for me. I very much appreciate that. I will have a show, which I'm planning to after the draft on Thursday evening at some point. Again, the Hawks may not do anything on Thursday, but if they don't, we'll have plenty to talk about elsewhere with rumblings and roster stuff and maybe cap connections, etc. We will have enough to do a show, and then I'll probably do some more Risacher at some point in time between now and Summer League. Summer League's still 2 weeks away. He'll be introduced on Friday. We're not slowing down, so stay tuned. Subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you all next time.